Iran's rulers promised to destroy my country, murder my people. And the response from this body, the response from nearly every one of the governments represented here, has been absolutely nothing. Utter silence. Deafening silence. Perhaps you can now understand why Israel is not joining you in celebrating this deal.
Latest news, Iran and Israel. The former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called on the government to take a more guarded approach to the ongoing war in Ukraine and instead focus its attention on the Iran nuclear deal. In his first public statement on the European conflict since Russia invaded its neighbor on Thursday, Netanyahu said at the opening of Monday's Likud faction meeting, "In days like these, it's advisable to take positions with the utmost caution. Unfortunately, in the last few days, we've heard too many unnecessary expressions and too many false predictions." Foreign Minister Yair Lapid condemned the Russian invasion, and Prime Minister Naftali Bennett on Sunday acceded to a Friday request from the Ukrainian president to offer to mediate negotiations with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Netanyahu, who is responsible for Israel's warring relations with Putin, mentioned neither Ukraine nor Russia by name as he referred to the events of the last few days. Neither he nor his Likud party have made significant statements on the unfolding European war, and Likud MK Yariv Levin on Sunday refused a request from Knesset Speaker Miki Levy to reestablish a committee on immigration and absorption in anticipation of a wave of new immigrants from Ukraine, citing the request as political. The former premier said, "I call on the government to behave responsibly, to speak less about what they don't need to talk about, and to deal with existential security threats." Netanyahu said the real security threat facing Israel is Iran, and that Bennett and Lapid have not given enough attention to the ongoing nuclear negotiations in Vienna in the past days. Netanyahu went on to say, "The nuclear deal with Iran threatens our existence. And on this very issue, Bennett and Lapid aren't saying anything and aren't doing anything." Netanyahu was expected to expand on these remarks during a no-confidence debate and vote later Monday in the Knesset plenum. Israel's former national security advisor says the Russian invasion of Ukraine could spark a rush to conclude the deal between Iran and the world powers. Meir Ben-Shabbat, top Benjamin Netanyahu aide and chief of staff for national security, says with the Ukraine crisis in its fifth day, the world's attention as well as that of Israel has been focused on Eastern Europe, which can enable Tehran to take advantage of the global tumult in order to make progress on the nuclear program in other areas. In an interview with the Times of Israel in Hebrew, published on Monday, he described Iran's nuclear program as far more direct to Israel's security, expressing concerns that it looks like they are very close to an agreement in Vienna. He went on to say, there could be effects in both directions. On the one hand, it could get in the way of the rush towards an agreement because of the difficulty of bringing representatives to sign the agreement during this time. On the other hand, it could lead to the mistaken conclusion that a deal must be signed quickly in order to remove the issue from the agenda and to focus on the crisis in Europe. Some Iranian politicians have expressed a cautious optimism that the Russian invasion of Ukraine might speed up a nuclear deal between Tehran and Washington. That's the latest news, and now my thoughts. Interestingly enough, as Netanyahu and the far-right Zionist Likud party continue to push the Iranian issue, final enemy of the Shia minority of the Islamic world, it is Israel who has been the aggressor. Now, as you can see, with the Russia-Ukrainian crisis, the only thing the United States and the coalition partners could do is enact economic sanctions against a country that can actually defend itself. A nuclear country, because we live in a nuclear world. For those who are adamant in saying that Russia is the aggressor, well, it's not as black and white. I have made a couple of videos this week talking about how the United States and the CIA taken advantage of the Eurasia conflict that goes back decades. It's all about geopolitical strategy that outlines Western imperialism as well as control by military might. The media in this country will continue to lie to you, will not report the facts honestly, in which they have done a pretty good job of desensitizing the situation and over exaggerating the situation as well. Now, I have made it a point in previous videos about Israeli aggression and the problem of the militant Wahhabi mindset. Iran is not one of those countries like Saudi Arabia or Bahrain, or the United Arab Emirates, that have a global or a Middle Eastern prejudicial point of view, where they need to become the predominant face of Islam. And with the Israeli-Iranian aggression, which goes back to the peak or the start, as I say, the start of their conflict, which would probably be after the Six-Day War, which they weren't a part of, but inflamed the Arab world and gave rise to Islamic militancy and the end of pan-Arab nationalism that was promulgated by former Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser. But I say the peak of the situation started with Syria. Now, Israel and Syria have observed the truth since Israel reaffirmed its control over most of the Golan Heights in the Yom Kippur War in 1973. But after the Arab Spring of 2011, This has led to several incidents of fire exchange across the once peaceful borders. And the United States, Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, along with the Gulf, have made Bashar al-Assad the enemy. This is not an overnight thing. This is in the foreign policy plans of former foreign policy advisors, some still living, such as the Odin Yanam plan, and the Paul Wolfowitz doctrine, as well as it being expanded under the Bush doctrine and the Project for New American Century, in which the plans for the neocons and Israeli Ludikites, as well as the Pentagon and US, Israelis, and Gulf foreign lobbyists who want to control the Middle East with puppet regimes. And if they can't get that, they will use the military to destroy the country. This is not a conspiracy. This is recorded fact in which one could look up yourself. But if you're not willing to listen and to heed the warnings made decades earlier about what US imperialism looks like and what it has done just in the Middle East alone, you're not going to see what's going to happen in Ukraine or in China or Iran. And you probably won't even care. But I will continue to voice my thoughts and the facts so that we could build a movement of educated, principled, and moral movement that is not divided along the political, religious, or racial isms. We're fighting along one another over trivial things and become a global movement in which we could threaten that which threatens human existence.